We're going to talk about a topic that we don't like to talk about. We really don't. I mean, how many people really just say, hey, I'm excited to talk about, somebody's final resting place? Uh, have you had any experiences in planning or actually, doing all of the things that's necessary to bring someone to their final resting place? What's that like? I'm sorry? We do our wills, not fun. Uh, it's emotional. It's all of these things and more. I'll tell you the word that I like to use is it's unnatural. We don't like to think about it because it just seems so unnatural. Some person once said that the reason it seems unnatural is that we were never designed for it. When God made us, He made us to live forever with Him. So death is completely unnatural. And I started to think about this a little bit the other week because within 2 days marked the anniversary of my brother's death and my father's death. They're 2 days apart. And I called up some family members. These are headstone pictures from the Gladkowskis. This is my father's side of the family. And most of them are in this one particular cemetery. We have my uncle Alphonse, who died in Korea as a prisoner of war. This is my Aunt Jessie. That's actually my grandfather, my father's father, who I never met, who drank himself into an early death while my dad was deployed overseas in World War II. This is my Busha. This is the Polish grandmother. And then on the bottom right is would have been my Uncle Bernie. That was my brother, my father's younger brother, who died after a failed appendix removal. He developed peritonitis and died. And then that's my mom's headstone marker. And what made all of these things sort of weird for me is that a lot of this happened, my mom's death and whatever, and my dad's, all happened during COVID. So what was normal was no longer normal. It really, we had a viewing, and you know how many people showed up? Yeah, really only my cousin's family, because everybody it was in the very early days of it, and it was very unusual. It was very difficult, just from the idea of handling it, but then of having all this other stuff on top of it. And so we're going to look at the final days of the death of Jacob. We've been following Joseph and now the reunion of his family. And now it's come time. His father is old and is on his deathbed. And Jacob, he brought the boys in. Remember, he told them stories about them. He gave instructions about what wanted to happen, and then he breathed his last. Has anybody else ever been in a room where somebody breathed their last? Okay, wow, I didn't expect that. What was that like?
Well, it kind of depended if you were related to him or not. I mean, I've done it, at work, and it wasn't as sad
Mm-hmm.
as it was when I was there when both my parents passed. But it's very emotional,
Mm-hmm.
you know. The one thing is that got me through it is because I knew where they were.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about it? Yes.
Well, on my side of the family, it's very peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
But on his side of the family, it was very mild and hard.
I'll tell you one thing that happened, and I was in a hospital room someone who was under my care spiritually. Uh, their mother, uh, who was diabetic, went into a diabetic coma and was alone and left unattended for days, and was, if you'll excuse the expression, was brain dead. Her heart was pumping, but nothing else was going on. And so they brought her to the hospital, and there was really nothing they could do other than, to try to make her comfortable. And then the nurse came in, excuse me, listening to the heart and saying, it's coming down to the end. They can tell. And you know what happened? Nothing. Bells didn't go off. There was no sirens. It was just going on. And, a couple hours later, the nurses were running in and out and listening, and then finally said that she's gone. And again, it was not a big, there were no things dropping out of the sky. The earth didn't open up. It was just moving on. It's like when Walt Disney died. He was in a hospital. You notice I talk about Walt Disney a lot. And he had lung cancer from years and years of smoking. And, his brother was there, and his brother was, touching his feet saying, it's okay, kid. And he died. And who's Walt Disney? I mean, he's got Walt Disney World named after him and all these things, but it came time where he died. And we see this with in Joseph's life with his dad when Jacob breathes his last. And what is Joseph's reaction to this? There's been all of this brokenness, separation, and now he dies, and what does Joseph do? Throws himself on his father, and he grieves. He just doesn't do a little tear down his cheek. He grieves. That's the kind of loss he's feeling. And you think back on the life of Joseph as we've gone through it. When he was thrown into that dry pit, there's no mention that he cried. When he was pulled up and sold into slavery, there's no mention that he cried. When he was sold into Potiphar's house, there's no mention that he cried. When Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of rape, he didn't cry. When he was thrown in prison, he didn't cry. When the cupbearer forgot him for years, he didn't cry. When Pharaoh calls him up and he interprets the dream, he didn't cry. But he cried when he saw his brothers. And now he cries when his father is dead. And so he does what every good Egyptian does, even though he's not Egyptian by birth, but it's where he lives. He has his father mummified because they're going to take him back. Remember, we had the instructions. He said, you're not going to bury me here. You're going to take me back. And so they had him mummified, and the reaction, the Egyptians see how Joseph responds. And what's their response? That even the Egyptians, who didn't know this guy hadn't done anything for them. He wasn't an all-star. He wasn't a great titan of business or anything else. And yet, because of the relationship with Joseph that they had, they also mourned. And then Joseph goes after the period. It takes time, a number of days, it's weeks, to do the mummification. Joseph appears before his boss, Pharaoh, and says, hey, can I take a leave of absence and take my dad back to the home plot? And Pharaoh says, go, because your father made you swear to do it. So Pharaoh, again, you think about the relationship that Joseph has with Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't get on his laptop and say, well, let me see how many days you've earned. We all got, how many sick days or leave. He just says, go. The nation goes into mourning. They didn't know him, but they went into mourning. And so Joseph goes up to bury his dad. And the whole family goes up with him. And there's a whole lot of Egyptians who go up too, because they're showing that relationship that they had with him. And they went up, and it's all these chariots and horsemen. This is a big deal. And I was trying to think in my memory, where was there another big deal like this? And for better or for worse, the biggest one I could think of is when Lady Di died. After that, that's where this picture is taken from. I'd like to show you a short video clip that was taken from her funeral and broadcast on television. It takes about a minute and a half, but just watch what you see. Well, no, actually, I'm wrong. Again, this is John F. Kennedy's. Now, most of you are not old enough to remember when John Kennedy was assassinated. But what happened? The world stopped, right? The world stopped when that happened. Everything stopped. Businesses closed. People who had never met Kennedy mourned. They cried. They lined the streets. And this went on for days. And you think back again on Joseph's life, what he did impacted so many people. That's why the Egyptians, both in the government and just everyday people, he saved their lives. He brought food to their tables, and he was organized about it. And there was never a whiff that he was taking any money under the table. Think about that today. So he does this. And so when they reached the threshing floor, when they took his body up and they observed more mourning for him. And this is the picture I was confused about before. This is from Lady Di's funeral. Remember what happened? What did people do? Now these are people who had never met Lady Di. And what did they do? They brought flowers. People wrote poems. People drew pictures, wrote letters, and brought them to the palace because of how her life and what she did and what she said was so impactful. And now is that video clip, thank you for your patience, from her funeral. Look at the crowds that lined the procession. Do you hear that? What are they doing? They're applauding. They're showing respect. When after Diana's sudden death in that horrific car accident, her ex-husband Charles went to Paris to bring the body back, and the scene of the people in Paris just lining the streets and people wailing, crying, who had never met her. And yet she represented something incredibly powerful to them. And this is what happens with Jacob. And it really wasn't Jacob, is because Jacob was related to Joseph. And this is where they go. So Jacob's son, they did what, remember, Jacob had told them what he wanted them to do. And guess what? They followed the instructions. They had this manual, if you will. They said, these are the things that Dad wanted to have happen. And so they took him to the burial place. They didn't cut corners. They said, this is, I remember talking with someone about my dad. Okay, Mom had died, Dad is alive, okay? So we did the funeral the way Mom and Dad wanted it, because Dad is there, right? And so fine. And let me tell you, and I don't say this with any malice, it ain't cheap, okay? It ain't cheap. So anyway, I have to then go and do these same kinds of arrangements with my dad and what he wanted to do. And somebody came up to me and said, I was talking about the plans, and they said, are you really going to do all that? Do you have any clue how much it's going to cost? I said, yeah, I got a clue. I got a clue. I got a quote. Okay, I got more than a clue. I got a quote. And they said, but they won't be here. Why go to all this stuff when they're not here? It's not going to matter to them. I have a relative whose mother died, and they wanted a solid cherry, real wood, cherry coffin.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What the price of wood is.
And after she died, no. No, they just changed it. And I don't hold anything against them for that. But that's the respect. You think about the boys, the Jacob's sons and Joseph, they did it exactly. There would have been an easier way. There would have been a cheaper way. Maybe they could have put a stamp on him and put him on one of those Amazon trucks, to get him up there. But no, they did it. They took care of it personally. And after burying the father, they all come back. And what do you always do after you bury somebody?
Have a big meal.
Yeah, you eat, exactly. You have a meal. You have a meal of remembrance, where you get to talk about things. I think I've told you this story, and I apologize for repeating, but I'm up front, so I get to do it. My dad, when he was in school, was during the Depression. And there were like 14 kids, no money. They were just, this far away from being evicted. And he would go to school, and for a penny, you could have milk and graham crackers at school as a lunch break. And Dad could never afford that. And so he made up his mind at that age, I know I'm going to have enough because I got money for milk and graham crackers. And he always had milk and graham crackers in the house. And so when we had the dinner afterwards, after the memorial service, we sat around. We were going to have crab cakes because we're in Maryland. And we served milk and graham crackers to everybody. And we gave a toast to the memory, because that's what was important to him. And that you wonder what would the boys talk about? You know, their father was, you know, he wasn't perfect by a long shot, just like you and me. But, you know, they still stayed together. And they went, maybe shared a meal, maybe shared some stories. You know, you think about, but, you know, it's a burial, and, you know, there are other burials in the Bible, and the most interesting one to me is the burial of Jesus. The burial of Jesus is recorded historically in fairly good detail in all the Gospels. And you got to wonder, you know, remember the story? There's this guy, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a secret follower of Jesus. He asked for permission to get the body, and Pilate says, hey, he's dead already? Yeah, so they give him the body. Remember, Joseph takes the body and prepares it for burial, goes and buys materials and wraps the body with it, and then puts it in his own tomb that's been cut out of rock. And, you know, he goes through all of this. And maybe for you and for me, the question is, what's the big deal? It's only, you know, for us, it's only a body. You know, Marion and I have an agreement that we have these 2 giant hefty bags, you know, that's the way to take care of it. But, you know, we think about it, and we maybe think, you know, it's not such a big deal. But for these people, it was a big deal. It was an incredibly big deal. You know, and I mentioned about how, you know, just thinking back this other week about these 2 days, memorializing that. Now, you may think I'm kind of weird, but that's long gone conclusion. But in my calendar, on my personal information, I put those dates in. I've got dates of the birth dates of everyone in my family. I know those dates cold, but I still put them in there. I have our anniversary date. I have the date that I first met Mary, our first date. I have all these things, but I also have the date of the death of people who were important to me. You know, I have the date of my parents, Mary Ann's parents, a dear friend of ours from Delaware. The date, I have a dear friend in Orlando when his wife died, and the other time when their teenage daughter was killed in a tragic auto accident. You know, that these things are important because when it comes to the end, that's really all that's left is the burial. There's a scene, there's a great movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's called The Lion in Winter. And in this movie, the king has put his 3 sons in prison and is planning to kill them because they're trying to kill him. And so they're in prison, and this is a scene when they think their dad's coming for them.
He's here. He'll get no satisfaction out of me. He isn't going to see me beg.
Ah, you chivalric fool, as if the way one fell down mattered.
When the fall is all there is, it matters.
Did you hear that? You know, why be concerned about the fall? And Anthony Hopkins says, when the fall is all that's left, it matters. When you're at the end, it matters. And I apologize for what I'm about to say. Before many of you were born, there was a group called the Beatles. And the Beatles had a song, and, you know, you probably have heard it. You may not have memorized it like I have. But there's a song in an album called Abbey Road. It's The End. And it says, and in the end, The love you take is equal to the love you make.
That's nice, that's true.
It's not true.
No.
Not true at all. This is based on an idea of karma that says, this give and take. And karma is a cruel taskmaster. There's no such thing as grace. There's no such thing as love and forgiveness. They were wrong. Because when it comes time for God for loving us and our relationship with him, it ain't even close. We see Jesus gave his life for what? Our good works. What nice little children we are. No, for our sins, just as our Father planned. In order to do what? To rescue us from the evil world we live in. We need rescuing. I need rescuing more than you know. And Jesus came to do this for us, for you, for me, to change us. Remember, we heard about sin, and it's the idea of what? Missing the mark, not hitting the target, throwing up a shot that clangs off the rim, missing the bullseye in life. And that's what sin is. And we're then go on in 1 John, we know what real love is. Why? Because Jesus did what? Gave up his life. Now, did he give up his life because we were so good? Because we had earned it? No. And so we ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. Jacob breathed his last. Jesus breathed his last. But unlike Jacob and everybody else who has ever lived on planet Earth, Jesus didn't die like everybody else. Did you know that? Did you know Jesus didn't die like everybody else? Death comes and takes away, except for Jesus. Because it says that Jesus gave up his spirit. Jesus gave it up. He died purposefully. He let his life in his body go. He did that for us. It's a completed action that continues today. He gave it up for people like me, of all people like you. There's a poet, Tennessee Williams, who once wrote that we live in a perpetual burning building. That's life. Okay, it's what and what we must save from it all the time is love. You see, we save what's important. We save what is precious. What was it, 5 years ago when the church in Paris burned down? Remember that? That giant cathedral burned? This is a picture. Firemen ran into the building to save precious works, precious memorials, precious things of faith. They were willing to run into the building when Notre Dame was burning. You see, love isn't fluffy. Love isn't puffy. This is love. Willing to run into the fire. I'm going to play a scene from the end of one of the episodes of The West Wing where President Bartlett is speaking to a crowd, and just hours before there had been a tragedy at a college which he will describe.
Securing peace in a time of global conflict, sustaining hope in this winter of anxiety and fear. More than any time in recent history, America's destiny is not of our own choosing. We did not seek, nor did we provoke an assault on our freedom and our way of life. We did not expect, nor did we invite, a confrontation with evil. Yet the true measure of a people's strength is how they rise to master that moment when it does arrive. 44 people were killed a couple of hours ago at Kennesaw State University. 3 swimmers from the men's team were killed and 2 others are in critical condition when, after having heard the explosion from their practice facility, they ran into the fire to help get people out. Ran into the fire. The streets of heaven are too crowded with angels tonight. There are students and our teachers and our parents and our friends. The streets of heaven are too crowded with angels. But every time we think we've measured our capacity to meet a challenge, we look up and we're reminded that that capacity may well be limitless. This is a time for American heroes. We will do what is hard. We will achieve what is great. This is a time for American heroes, and we reach for the stars. God bless their memory. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
It's obviously, not a real situation, but there are people just like those firefighters. You think about remember when Chernobyl, remember that it was a nuclear power plant that had the meltdown? There were people who, in essence, killed themselves, exposed themselves to lethal dosage of radiation to try to save other people. We all know people like that, and we think about their memory. And we should. And yet, I look back on the cost that Jesus paid. He ran into the fire. He ran into the fire that I had caused, that we all had caused, and paid the price to snuff it out once and for all. You think about other people in the Bible in fire, you immediately think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They were thrown into the fire. They didn't have a choice. Well, maybe they did have a choice. They could have chosen to deny God. But Jesus walked into the fire. Jesus knew exactly what was coming, and he walked into Jerusalem. He knew exactly what was going to happen that week, and he rode that donkey into Jerusalem, because that was the symbol that told everybody, I am the Son of God. I am God the Son. I am your Messiah. And they killed him for it. But then he rose from the dead for you and for me to bring us back. He walked into the fire. May we walk into the fire that he calls us to. Let's pray. Oh my God, I'm so grateful that you walked into the fire for you and for me, for all of us, unworthy beyond any measure. And so, oh God, your forgiveness is overpowering. We thank you for it. Remake us. Renew us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you all have a great week. Enjoy yourselves. And I know you'll try to find a way to muddle through this life as we have no more football.
Breathe.